surveillance integrated into national public health surveillance systems, focusing on lab capacity building, and then data generation and data use, and collecting case studies so that we can demonstrate what can happen when you take data and you apply that to implement policies to improve food safety. And I'm really grateful and want to mention specifically that we have great representation from the Singapore Food Agency in all three working groups, which has been really encouraging, and as well as special thanks to Dr. Joanne Chan, who's a co-chair from the Singapore Food Agency of one of our working groups. So wanted to mention that. In terms of our general meetings, we, as I said, had our first and second meeting at the WHO headquarters in May 2024. We're going to bring together our network members in Oman at the end of October this year, and then very grateful that Singapore Food Agency has offered to host us, I believe sometime in early 2027, to be confirmed exactly, but that's going to help us to bring together network members to review progress, focus on some strategic planning, and help hopefully continue fostering collaboration as we all work towards these common goals of improving global food safety. And last slide, just to mention that in celebration of World Food Safety Day, the Alliance issued a statement which really just aims to highlight our actions that are turning science into food safety solutions, focusing on generating data, as one of the key messages this year is there is no science without data. So that short statement showcases our work on surveillance, capacity building, improving lab capacities and data use, and really calls for investment to scale up global food safety impacts. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I hope we can encourage anyone from entities interested in learning more about the Alliance to reach out and get in touch, and I'll be happy to provide more information. Thank you very much, Marshall.
Thank you, Carmen. Okay, next, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Gina Sama, Regional Emergency Director from the WHO Western Pacific Regional Office. Dr. Sama will be highlighting the importance of collaboration between WHO and its collaborating centers in building global and regional capabilities in food safety. Dr. Sama, over to you. I'm sorry, Dr. Sama. Your voice seems to be very distorted at the moment. Yeah, seems fine for now. I'm so sorry, Dr. Sama. We have to interrupt you. It's very soft and I think they can't hear anything. Would you like me to play your pre-recorded intervention?
How about we do that? Go for it.
Thank you. Just give me a moment.
Thank you.
Yes, here it is. Yes, anyone? Mm.
To be acknowledged. For over 30 years, the Singapore Food Agency has actively contributed to WHO. Distinguished guests, colleagues, and partners, greetings and thank you for this opportunity to join you today on World Food Safety Day 2025. I'm really happy to be here with you. This year's theme, Food Safety, Science in Action, reminds us that protecting public health through food safety systems requires more than just good intentions. It requires evidence, expertise, and collaboration. This theme is also at the heart of the Singapore Food Agency, and so it is and a privilege to take a moment and thank you for your contribution to science in food safety action. The long-standing collaboration between the Singapore Food Agency and the World Health Organization has to be acknowledged. For over 30 years, the Singapore Food Agency has actively contributed to WHO's work on food safety. Since the designation in 1992 as a WHO collaborating center for food contamination monitoring, the Singapore Food Agency has played a key role in advancing the regional and global efforts to strengthen food safety systems. This work has included advancing methods for exposure and dietary risk assessment, harmonizing sampling and testing approaches for food and food contaminants, delivering training and workshops on capacity building, and actively contributing to WHO-led initiatives, including the Regional Framework for Food Safety. These initiatives are not just scientific exercises. They have real-world impact on food safety policies, strengthened food safety systems, and on consumer health. Folks, together, we are shifting the needle. All member states now have an InfoSan emergency contact point, allowing for greater collaboration and coordination during food safety incidents. Many countries have reviewed their legislation and food safety systems and modernized their systems and aligned them with international standards, such as Codex Alimentarius. Some are taking risk-based approaches to make traditional food markets more safe. As these gains are made and capacities and expertise grow over time, the scope of this collaboration between WHO and the Singapore Food Agency has also grown. The SFA is now recognized as the WHO Collaborating Center for Food Contamination Monitoring and Risk Assessment. WHO looks forward to working with you on early warning systems and data-driven risk assessments, deepening regional collaboration on contaminants of emerging concern, expanding capacity building through digital tools and online training and peer-to-peer initiatives, as well as embedding interdisciplinary approaches, including social science, for public health communication. In line with this year's theme, the SFA and WHO are committed to translating knowledge into impact as science drives our decisions. We use surveillance data to inform risk prioritization for foodborne hazards. We applied toxicological exposure models to guide policy and regulation, and increasingly, we are exploring behavioral science to improve risk communication and consumer practices. WHO is proud to have such an outstanding collaboration with the Singapore Food Agency, one of the enablers of science-informed policies that makes food safer for us all. Let me close by thanking the Singapore Food Agency for the continued trust, and all our partners, regional authorities, labs, academic institutions, and consumer protection agencies for taking this journey with us together. On this World Food Safety Day, let's all recommit to putting science into action and working together to ensure safe, resilient, and trustworthy food safety systems. With that, I thank you.
All right, so sorry for the technical error earlier on. So thank you, Gina. I apologize that you were not able to share in person, but thanks for the intervention that is pre-recorded. And indeed, as part of the WHO Collaborative Center Network, we will continue to contribute and support the various regional efforts in building capabilities for food safety. So now we'll be moving into our behavioral science segment. Next is Michelle, who will be presenting on the above topic. Michelle is the Deputy Director of the Analysis and a senior member of the science team at the UK Food Standard Agency. With over 20 years of experience in government and a background in communications, she remains an endless curious scholar of public attitudes and behaviors. She leads a multidisciplinary team of analysts and works with leading experts and a broad range of research tools to explore how and why people act the way they do, and what the future may hold when it comes to food. Michelle will be sharing case studies from the UK FSA, highlighting how behavioral science is applied across food risk analysis. Without further ado, let's welcome Michelle.
So thank you very much, Marshall, and good afternoon, good morning here. I am just looking for the right slides to show you. Can you tell me when they've popped up, and can I just check everyone can hear me all right? Okay, are they looking right for you?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much to SFA for inviting me to join this exciting event. Happy World Food Safety Day for Saturday. Yes, my name is Michelle Patel. I'm the Deputy Director for Analysis at the Food Standards Agency. We are the food regulator for England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Scotland has got its own food regulator, and we work really closely with them. My unit's responsibility is to use social sciences, including consumer and business behavioural science, statistics, economics, operational research and foresight, to offer sound evidence and good advice to underpin more effective policy decisions. Much of what a food regulator does boils down to the assessment, management and communication of food risk, which we call the food risk paradigm. At its most simple, there are three types of risk: where food comes from, in terms of its ingredients, any environmental contaminants linked to its place of origin, or those ingredients, what has been done to it during processing, manufacturing, packaging, and so on, which might introduce contaminants or allow microbial growth, and what people are likely to do with it. We seek robust evidence, as a matter of course, on the first two, and we believe that it is appropriate to do the same for the third. So I'd like to suggest some ways in which people's behaviour and the science of people's behaviour can contribute to risk analysis when it comes to food. And beyond that, I actually want to argue that the public interest and how you bring it into your decisions is an integral part of building the trustworthiness that underpins a regulator's licence to operate. So let's think about what people do with food. To start with, like I said, we need to understand not only what is in and on food, but also what people across the system are likely to do with it. And those people include citizens, business employees, members of allied professions such as veterinarians, environmental health officers, etc. We're all part of a food system. In order to assess, manage and communicate risk, we need to know how these players are likely to engage with and respond to information and the actions they are likely to prioritise and take. And so to do this, we draw on multiple disciplines within the behavioural sciences. That might include approaches from the cognitive, social and organisational psychology, behavioural science, sociology, anthropology, as well as applied approaches from consumer, marketing and communication science, which is my background. These are relevant throughout the risk analysis process. Getting a grip on the views, the values and aspirations of people and the communities we serve is quite fundamental to the FSA's trustworthiness as an authority and our ability thus to tackle our remit. So we handle risk analysis. We handle risk assessment, risk management and risk communication. And there's always been an elephant in the room when it comes to food policy, that is risk management decisions. They don't just rest on a risk assessment. They never have. They rest on a whole lot of factors, including public acceptability, economic impact, the impact on a bunch of other things, like animal welfare, social equity. These are political decisions, but it seems crucial that in order to make them well, all relevant and legitimate factors have a solid and evidence base as other types of empirical evidence provided to risk managers to make the recommendations and then to ministers who make the decisions. It's important to recognise that risk management decisions made by regulators can often be based largely on these other factors. That doesn't reduce their legitimacy. Weighing the hazards and risks as an option for risk management action against its social impacts, costs and benefits is an important and integral component of risk management. It's what makes food policy challenging. I think that social, economic and ethical factors that are inextricably bound up in national risk management decision making should be identified explicitly, transparently, and that there are sciences that can contribute robust evidence to this. Much of that evidence comes from my team. It's gathered in line with scientific principles, it's often peer-reviewed, it's usually published. And then let's think about risk for a minute. The near infinite complexity of human behaviour has made it tempting for the concept of risk to focus quite narrowly on the multiplication of the probability and magnitude of an event. However, everything we know about risk perception and all the dark circles under the eyes of risk communicators attest to the reality that the direct impact and indirect impact, the ripple effect of a risk is wider. Risk should be considered in much broader terms from the start. So there's been a lot written out there on the drivers of risk perceptions, but there's no one size fits all when it comes to the heuristics of risk perceptions. We have to understand that we all, even scientists, rely on pre-existing knowledges and values to form our judgments. This is human. For example, in establishing the acceptance of new technologies, people tend to deploy a number of rules of thumb, making judgments based on their feelings about the following questions. What is the impact of the risk to me? Is it controllable by me? Does it feel unnatural or natural? Is it familiar? Have I been exposed to this before? Does this feel like my past experience? Is this current or is this old? Is it proportionate when set against the benefits? When the management of risk through public policy involves understanding and perhaps changing what people are doing, behavioural science can make substantial contributions to understanding the mental models. Moreover, each risk has its own characteristics. Each occasion is different. Added to that, food is something people are personally highly invested in. There is little that's closer to home than food. If we ignore factors such as familiarity, dread, personal ability to influence the outcome, and the perceived ability of those in charge to manage that risk, both honestly and competently, we're likely to miss the mark when it comes to the management and communication of a risk to the general public. So social research techniques can help to establish the segments of society with whom we wish to communicate and to understand more about their lived experiences. So, for example, one of the first things my team did when we were set up was to publish a segmentation of the consumer audiences by reported risk behaviours. And we mapped that through social research questions against commercial databases to achieve a rounder picture of the types of people with whom we wish to communicate and how to reach them. We can explore their current level of understanding, the heuristics they apply, their emotional drivers, and we use qualitative analysis for that, mapped against the ideal expert level of understanding, and then establish the gaps. Risk messages can then be tested in peacetime, as it were, before we use them for real. For example, we've tested several ways of framing risk messages around foodborne disease to understand the most effective and appropriate methods to use with different segments of the audience and to identify any unforeseen responses. Often we use deliberative techniques for this to understand people's initial responses, their information needs, and then their considered opinion. Like the work we published on consumer attitudes recently to gene editing. These are much more complex and nuanced than a simple survey could ever tell you. And more recently, we published evidence reviews of consumer awareness and acceptability of cell-cultivated protein and precision fermentation. So I'm very much looking forward to Professor Zhong's presentation later on. Involving social scientists, including social researchers, economists, communications experts, during problem formulation provides wider contextual input. It ensures the transparency of any starting assumptions, and it enables early mitigation of risks to an organisation. There are different ways in which evidence of varying weights can contribute. So exploratory social research, including new methodologies such as social media listening, can provide insights for surveillance. They can reveal emerging risks. But then statistically robust quantitative research can track reported concerns, knowledge, attitudes, behaviours, and help risk assessors understand likely exposure rates. It can look at beliefs and preferences and can allow segmentation of the population on the basis of their vulnerability to risk. For example, we at the FSA work with the Department of Health and Social Care to contribute to the National Diet and Nutrition Survey. This tells us what people are actually eating, helps us calculate exposure for risk assessments. But then we track consumer knowledge, attitudes and behaviours through our own major survey, Food and You Too. Both are official statistics and subject to the strictest scrutiny. We also track faster moving consumer concerns through a regular monthly tracking survey. This trades off pace for the robustness of a larger survey, but it allows us to respond more quickly in an incident or to a sudden new concern. And underneath that, though we seldom use it unless in a crisis, we have access to a panel of over 200,000 consumers, so we can, if need be, get statistically robust answers to simple questions within a couple of days. But it's not all about surveys. In-depth qualitative work, often involving iterative methodologies like I talked about before, i.e. working with people over time to capture those spontaneous and then more reflective responses, can help us understand why. It can help us understand the drivers of attitudes and behaviours. It provides more robust evidence for policymakers about why a risk is occurring at any point of the food chain. This isn't just about consumers. Or it can help map out the drivers of acceptance or rejection of technology. For example, I said, we recently published deliberative studies into consumer understanding and awareness of genome editing techniques. These guided our policy decisions on this potential controversial, but also potentially transformative new technology. Alongside this, you can use more quantitative techniques. So consumer preferences can be assessed through hypothetical discrete choice experiments, some of the techniques that come in through economics. This method is used extensively in applied economics and marketing research to provide information that frequently cannot be obtained from existing data because the products being examined may not be available or cannot be purchased in existing markets. We've done this in the past to look at the acceptability of certain production processes, not yet on the market in the UK, to help us work out how people feel, what their likely response would be. And we recently also used a different technique called willingness to pay, but similar, to help us model and quantify the real life cost of living with an allergy or a food hypersensitivity. So these techniques can be applied to various questions. Where the management of risk through public policy involves understanding and changing what people do, behavioural science can make substantial contributions. So this is a branch of science which includes psychology, neuroscience, economics, behavioural economics, sociology, and social anthropology. It examines the patterns of behaviour at micro, as an individual, and macro, at group or societal level. Policymakers work with our social scientists to help maximise the impact of interventions and to understand the behavioural change models and theories that might be used to design potential interventions, to test them, adapt them, evaluate them, and observe how they work. So, for example, our recent study, Kitchen Life 2, helped us get closer to real-life behaviour in order to refine our risk assessment models and our policy interventions. We put cameras, with their consent, in 100 domestic and commercial kitchens, observing people's behaviour to see what they really do. We collected hundreds of thousands of data points to help us understand what are the environmental drivers of behaviour and what those behavioural drivers lean to in terms of transmission of foodborne disease. You then take these things out to test through more experiments. For example, working with a major high street restaurant, we recently published the findings of a study of allergy declarations to see if we could improve their visibility to customers without reducing the overall customer experience. We actually found it slightly enhanced it, which helps us influence industry to take on these new practices. It's now more likely in the UK that you'll get asked whether you have an allergy, and then more likely that, especially if a younger person, you'll declare the allergy and then be safer as a result. We're now working with the Department for Environment on a series of more than 10 controlled trials to influence healthier, more sustainable food choices. These are in field now and they'll report next year. And I've been so fascinated to see through my colleagues at SFA how you're using observed experiments to look at how pathogens get transmitted, for example, in sushi restaurants, and then applying that to your own risk assessment and management. And I think in this area, we have much to learn from you. Finally, evidence from behavioural science can help evaluate the effectiveness of a risk management intervention. So taken alongside other data, observed changes in the results of a randomised control trial or reported changes indicated by trend in survey data can be indicators of impact of a policy. So, for example, the data from our tracking study is one of the several sources of evidence used to determine the success of the food hygiene rating scheme in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. We're using that evidence alongside data on levels of food poisoning, business compliance, inspections, to influence more consistent legislation across the 3 nations we work in. But for a lot of scholars in the field, there's an ethical and democratic dimension to this. Public participation in policy allows citizens to decide not only the policy that they will accept, but what value systems they want to guide our decisions. It helps resolve some of the democratic tension that you find in the regulatory system. And publishing what we do helps legitimise decision-making by making it open and transparent. And so we've long been using more participative models to develop our policy. A few years ago now, we published the findings of a study called Food in a Pandemic, which helped understand what consumers wanted from the food system coming out of the pandemic. In 2022, we looked again at what consumer interest in food is in this food system. This told us that people have a broad and nuanced understanding of the social issues bound up in food. They have an interest in, for example, food not just being affordable for them, but for everybody. This understanding of public values is now informing our reform of food regulation, but also feeding into the development of the UK's National Food Strategy, working with colleagues across government. And I want to touch here on why that matters. Stakeholders and the public will judge the trustworthiness of the FSA and our risk analyses based on how honest and competent and consistently we communicate risk and uncertainty to them, and whether our assessment of what is important aligns with theirs. To a large extent, the effectiveness of our communication hinges upon that perceived trustworthiness, the so-called communicator effect. This is a strategic issue for any organisation wishing to be listened to in contemporary society. We're surrounded by mis and disinformation. To be effective and influential, regulatory bodies need to work hard to earn and deserve and maintain public trust. Otherwise, they will struggle with stakeholder acceptance of communication. Public health may be put at risk. Moreover, in developed contemporary societies, the ability to listen, understand and interpret the attitudes and behaviours and values of the people we serve is essential to earn the trust of citizens and other stakeholders. We're in a digital age of reference, not deference. It's got profound implications for a regulator that wishes to be trusted by the public. We recently published some research into the drivers of trustworthiness in the food system and its regulation, and this alongside a literature review of our latest scholarship and primary research with consumers, journalists and practitioners informed our risk communication toolkit. And just last week, we published a more up-to-date evidence review of how to build, maintain, and if need be, recover your trustworthiness as an organisation. So we can't just think about it like analysing people as if they were some other strange species over there. As well as observing, asking and analysing people, we sometimes ask them to participate directly in its science. One of the things I've recently been very pleased that we could do was publish the finding from our new programme of work to explore how we can involve the communities we serve when building the evidence base on which policy decisions are made. There's no one-size-fits-all definition for citizen science, but it involves engaging with communities and asking them to be part of the project. Citizen scientists can contribute to any stage, from project conceptualization to data collection to analysis and other ways of co-creating the evidence base for policy. For them, it offers a learning opportunity, the satisfaction of contributing to evidence, and the potential to influence a policy. It can also provide data that is high in volume, has a wide geographical spread, is relatively quick to deploy, and couldn't be accessed really any other way. We started with an evidence review, looking at current applications of citizen science for food. Then we co-funded 6 pilot projects with the Research Institute, engaging citizens to build the evidence base on topics ranging from antimicrobial resistance to allergies. While they were in part to test the feasibility of the methods, one in particular exposed new risk in the preparation of baby formula, which led to the NHS changing its guidance and certain products having their safety reassessed. So for many, but not all of these techniques, meaningful engagement requires people to reach an informed position so that they can engage with what are, at the end of the day, complex technical issues. This is often a journey. The food system is incredibly complex and emotive. It is important, therefore, to ensure not only that the material we present is unbiased and technically accurate, but that the methods translate the abstract to the specific, so that engagement with the subject matter can be as fruitful as possible. This can mean creating design fictions or scenarios, playing Monopoly or shopping games, creating a mock online environment for people to buy and shop, asking people to write letters to their future selves, or asking them to curate and record conversations with their peers and their families. There are creative ways that you can help overhear what people are really thinking and feeling and obtain a better, more observed understanding of the values, preferences and trade-offs they would make if the final policy decision was theirs in real life. And we employ all of these strategies to get through what we call the deliberative dip, which is where the overly complex information or new information leads some people to resist engagement with an issue, or even to form an overly negative or even despairing point of view. If we're patient and creative and speak to people equitably, we think that the result is a better informed and more resilient understanding by citizens of the complexity of managing a risk. It actually enhances our reputation to do it that way. So in conclusion, at the FSA, we apply social and behavioural science techniques at every stage of the food risk analysis paradigm, in a huge variety of ways. They are an essential part of our evidence base. It is important to understanding the people and communities that we serve. It underpins our licence to operate as a regulator. And that's why social scientists are as much part of our science team as risk assessors or biosurveillance. For a regulator of food, building processes to take people's values, understandings, attitudes, behaviours and preferences into account is crucial to be able to evaluate the context and characteristics of a risk, to develop, implement and evaluate policy interventions, and to ensure that the evidence of a risk is communicated effectively and appropriately to the communities that we serve. The evidence base that we're accruing is used routinely to develop FSA policy, but we also hope that it is of value to the wider food science and research communities, and I hope it's been of interest to you today. It's all in the public domain, so feel free to use it. I have a lot, so I've pulled it all together under one short URL. This should be available for the next couple of weeks. If there's anything in there that you are interested in finding out more, please do get in touch, and we would love to have a chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. Is there any question from the floor? Perhaps I'll give a few minutes for those who have questions to either raise your hand or you may choose to type your questions. Yeah, Prof. Chong?
First, thanks very much, Michelle, for the presentation. I'm really interested, excuse me, I'm really interested in the study involving camera surveillance of restaurant workers. Would the report for that study be out anytime soon? And would it be made publicly available?
Of course, it's all published. I can put the link in the chat.
Oh, thank you. Thanks very much.
Okay, we have Maggie.
Maggie.
Okay. First, I'd like to thank Michelle for the presentation. Okay, I'd like to ask that most regulators rely on risk comms to communicate food risk to consumers. Do you think that information dissemination is enough to change people's behavior when it comes to food? Or do you think that the regulator can do more in the area of actively influencing the food choices of consumers, such as designing behavioral nudges or maybe imposing tax? Yeah.
In short, yes, yes, I do. So, as I say, we've got about 12 current behavioural trials in field at the moment, looking at, and none of them are information based, looking at the sort of nudges and environmental adjustments you can make to influence healthier, sustainable choices. We also have some looking at safer choices, and we have some looking at things around allergies. And I think if you break it down at the most simple level, behavior is influenced by capability, opportunity, and motivation. And just telling people doesn't it really influence any of those things. I always say that, you know, just telling people is a very floppy lever for behavior change. You have to really address the issue of, are people able to do it? Do they have the opportunity to do it? And are they motivated to do it? And then if you think about it in those terms, you can influence and change so many other things around people to move the needle on those three factors. I think people default to communications as because it's an easy one. I'm not saying that this stuff is easy, but I am pretty convinced by the evidence that it's effective. So, you know, a really good case in point is, how do you remodel a supermarket to put the right choices in the easy places to find them? You know, that's much more effective. Improvement's much more effective an intervention than having a poster up going, "Why don't you eat fruit?" for example.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Michelle.
Okay, is there any more questions from the floor? All right, if not, thank you so much, Michelle, for the insightful presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Okay, next up, our second speaker for today's webinar may be a familiar face to the novel food community, Professor Mark Chong. Prof. Chong is a professor of communication management by practice at the Singapore Management University. Just give me a moment, I lost. Yep. His research focuses on the risk and benefit perception in the area of novel food technologies, such as cultivated meat and GMOs. He has presented on this topic at numerous forums, including the International Heads of Food Agencies Forum and the Singapore International Agri-Food Week, just to name a few. His research has been published in many peer-reviewed journals, such as the Journal of Environmental Psychology, Appetite, Future Foods, Nature Biotechnology, and the Journal of Risk Research. Earlier in his career, he also conducted several field studies on Asian farmers' perceptions of genetically modified crops. Let me now hand the time over to Prof. Chong.
Thank you very much, Marshall, for the introduction. And thank you to the Singapore Food Agency for inviting me to present at this forum. I want to start with an apology. I'm still in the process of recovering from a sore throat, so my voice may crack during the presentation, and if that happens, please accept my apologies. I also want to say that there will be a few minor overlaps between some of the points that I will be making and Michelle's excellent earlier presentation. So, Marshall, before I go ahead, can I just confirm that I'm audible and that the slides are visible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, excuse me, I just want to start with two headlines that may be familiar to those of you who are in the novel food space. The first one comes from the New York Times. It was printed at the end of 2020, almost exactly 4.5 years ago. And the announcement had to do with Singapore's approval of what was then called lab-grown meat. That announcement represented a first in the world in that Singapore was the very first country worldwide to approve the commercial sale of lab-grown meat. And, it helped to, I guess, put the country on the world map. Shortly after that announcement, the company behind lab-grown meat, which is the US startup Eat Just, created a product called Good Meat, which is a kind of lab-grown chicken for sale in Singapore. And the first butchery in the world that had the honor of selling this product happens to be Hoover's, which is located in the Dempsey region. So I bring this up because cultivated meat is an example of novel food technologies. In the interest of time and given time constraints, I will be limiting my focus on cultivated meat, which is one of 3 types of alternative proteins. I think by now, most of you already have some level of familiarity with the term alternative proteins, but to borrow the slide from the Good Food Institute, alternative proteins refers to 3 broad clusters of novel food technologies, and these comprise cultivated meat. The term cultivated meat has gone under different names, including lab-grown meat, cultured meat, clean meat, and so on and so forth. But I would say that in the last 1 to 2 years, the term cultivated meat has become the norm in industry. In addition to cultivated meat, there is also plant-based meat. I think the 2 most familiar names to most consumers would be Impossible Meat and Beyond Meat. And then last but not least, we have the category of precision fermentation foods. This is the one that is probably getting the least attention, at least in academic research. So for the purpose of this presentation, I'm just going to focus on cultivated meat because if not, I'll be talking for the next few hours. I want to go back to the year 2000, long time ago. So this was an important year for me because I was just starting my postgraduate studies in the US. And right around this time, there was a lot of media coverage on the topic of genetically modified organisms and the companies behind this technology. GMOs, as you know, was a highly controversial topic, especially in certain parts of Europe. And what you see in front of you is an article that appeared in the New Yorker that was talking about this riddle, right? Which has to do with, why a technology which was developed at least partly for humanitarian and environmental reasons was attracting so much pushback from various stakeholders in society, including consumers and NGOs. So this sparked my interest, and it became the subject of my both my master's and PhD work in grad school. The reason I'm bringing up GMOs is because this topic remains very relevant today. So if we look back on history, and if you were to Google GMOs on the internet, you may come across images such as these ones, which have to do with the concept of GMOs being some kind of Frankenfood. So this is associated with the idea of Dr. Frankenstein, which is the basis, or rather the central character in the novel by Mary Shelley a long time ago. And it fundamentally has to do with the idea that scientists and organizations that are coming up with novel foods such as GMOs are trying to play God by messing around with the DNA of natural organisms. So in a paper written by these 2 authors, it was pointed out that the issues facing GMOs 20 to 30 years ago share some similarity with issues that are facing the cultivated meat industry. So the first is shared motivations. I think it can be argued that, as I mentioned earlier, part of the motivations for developing both GMOs and cultivated meat involve addressing environmental as well as humanitarian concerns and goals. But both these technologies have faced and are facing some public concerns, particularly around the topic of naturalness or unnaturalness, safety risks, and some concerns over corporate control of the food supply chain. And I already brought up the impact of how opponents to GMOs have managed to frame a novel food technology like GMO as a form of frankenfood, as a form of organizations and scientists trying to mess around with nature. So organizations and regulatory agencies that do not pay careful attention to public risk perception and to public engagement risk facing the kinds of setbacks that companies like Monsanto faced 10 to 20 years ago. So managing public perception effectively is critical to the success and perception as well as the acceptance of cultivated meat. So, and this is something that Michelle had already gone over, so I won't spend too much time on it. But I would say that the main concept for understanding public perception regarding novel food technologies such as cultivated meat is the concept of perceived risk, which was advanced by scientists such as Paul Slovich and his colleagues. So essentially, they're saying that while scientists before and maybe to some extent today believe that consumer perceptions of novel food technologies like cultivated meat are primarily influenced by probabilistic judgments. The fact is that lay people's risk perception is highly subjective and multidimensional, and these perceptions are influenced by things such as our emotions, our cultural values, and the social context. So psychological, social, and cultural factors actually shape perceived risks of lay people, like consumers, more than statistical probabilities. And I'll just quickly highlight two examples. So in the literature, one example that comes up a lot is that of nuclear energy. I think, factually speaking, few will argue that nuclear energy is one of the safest, one of the cleanest forms of energy in the world. Yet, public responses to this technology is, highly mixed, to put it mildly. And part of the reason that the response is highly mixed is because of what is known as the dread factor. So while nuclear energy is positioned as one of the cleanest forms of energy out there, at the back of lay people's mind is the fear that if something bad were to happen, that event will have catastrophic consequences or may have catastrophic consequences that may last several generations. The other example that gets brought up a lot is the difference in consumer or lay people responses to car versus airplane transportation. So statistically, traveling in a car is a lot more dangerous than traveling in a plane. However, we as lay people perceive car travel to be a lot safer than we are in control of the car, or so we think. Whereas, when it comes to air travel, unless you're flying your own private plane, the transportation of passengers on a plane lies in the hands of the pilot. So just that difference alone in who's actually controlling the vehicle translates into very different risk assessments for the different modes of transportation. So, because of these emotional, subjective factors, people often rely more on what feels risky than on what is objectively risky based on data. The point that I want to raise here, because it will come up again later in the presentation, is that risks become more acceptable when the perceived benefits are higher. So there's a little bit of a scale going on. So let me now zoom in on the perceived risks of cultivated meat on a global level based on the literature that has been published on this topic. I'm highlighting the main ones. So now, first and foremost, studies by scholars such as Gomez Luciano have found that safety and health concerns are among the primary risks perceived of cultivated meat. And these have to do with questions such as, will the long-term consumption of cultivated meat have consequences further down the road? We don't know, right? Because there has been no studies on this. Then the next category focuses on perceived unnaturalness. As some of you probably already know, cultivated meat is not culled from slaughtered animals. Instead, it is produced in a controlled environment like a laboratory, for instance. And because of that, there is perception that the meat that is being produced through this controlled process is very unnatural. And this perceived unnaturalness translates into also perceptions of the unnatural taste and texture of the meat. Third in this category is risk perceptions, focusing on the idea of tampering with nature, which is something I already talked about in relation to GMOs. So the first three risks that have been identified by scholars who have done work on this are classified as personal risks, or risks perceived to be of an individual nature. But cultivated meat is also associated with a number of social risks, including the potential displacement of traditional farming practices and agricultural jobs, potential resistance from racial and religious groups because of their dietary habits, and then last but not least, potential negative effects on eating traditions like barbecues. What about the perceived benefits of cultivated meat? Again, this is based on the global literature that's been published. Animal welfare is one of the top perceived benefits, if only because cultivated meat does not require the slaughter of thousands or hundreds of thousands of animals. In fact, one of the studies that I conducted in 2023 showed that Buddhists in Singapore were much more accepting of cultivated meat when they found out about how it was produced. So in other words, knowledge of the production process of cultivated meat fostered higher acceptance of cultivated meat among Buddhists in Singapore. The second category of perceived benefits relates to the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, because you don't need millions of cattle or chicken roaming the fields. This is followed by national food security. In a qualitative study I conducted and published in 2023, Singaporeans, because of our experience of facing disruptions to the food supply chain, no thanks to COVID-19, saw that the consumption of cultivated meat may translate into greater self-sufficiency and greater national food security on our part. A study by a colleague of mine at another university found that Singaporeans also associated the consumption of cultivated meat with potential benefits for better use of the scarce agricultural land that we have in this very small country. And then last but not least, there is the perception that cultivated meat is related to the lower risk of zoonotic and foodborne diseases like avian flu, and what have you. And as you can see from this diagram, the vast majority of the perceived benefits related to cultivated meat are social in nature rather than personal in nature, which will pose challenges for the acceptance of cultivated meat going forward. And that's because the research has shown that consumers, broadly speaking, right, are much more motivated by direct personal benefits than they are by societal benefits. So if they perceive that the consumption of cultivated meat, which is more expensive than conventional meat, translates into fewer personal direct benefits than it does for society at large, they may be less willing to forego conventional meat for it, especially when it costs quite a bit more. So what about risk perception of cultivated meat in Singapore? The empirical evidence for this is still quite embryonic, and the only study I could find is the one conducted by a colleague of mine. And I need to point out that this is a qualitative study based on focus group discussions, but she and her colleagues found that there are three main perceived personal risks having to do with health and safety risks, such as potential long-term benefits, potential long-term risks to health on humans, unnaturalness, in terms of taste and texture, as well as potential economic risks in terms of affordability. Then they found in the study that there was one big perceived societal risk, which is that it may pose challenges to the religious and racial dietary customs of particular groups, such as Muslims. Excuse me. So how do we move forward from here? I want to refer to a set of principles advanced by Rosenfeld and Tomiyama. They say that we can think about using one or more of these four influence levers: fostering trust in how cultivated meat is being produced; 2, addressing unawareness of the environmental impacts of conventional meat production; 3, addressing the perceived unnaturalness of cultivated meat; and last but not least, addressing social motivation. So let me quickly cover each of these in turn. So addressing or fostering trust in how cultivated meat is being produced. There's a lot of research showing that consumer acceptance of cultivated meat and novel food in general relies heavily on perceptions on how the novel food is being produced. The good news for Singapore is that the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is an annual global survey conducted by the PR agency Edelman, this trust barometer has shown consistently that Singaporeans have a very high level of trust in the Singapore government and the regulators. So this high level of trust bodes well for Singaporeans' acceptance of cultivated meat, because they trust that the government will do a good job in ensuring the safety of novel foods before they're being made available to consumers in the marketplace. But what the government and the regulators can do in partnership with the private players is to educate consumers about the processes and technology behind cultivated meat, because this has been shown to increase further trust and to reduce food nophobia, which is adverse reactions to novel foods, and thereby enhancing acceptance. The second lever involves addressing unawareness of the environmental impacts of conventional meat production. So the research shows that this unawareness may actually hinder appreciation of the benefits of cultivated meat. So the way forward is to emphasize not only the benefits of cultivated meat, but also the negative environmental effects and the ethical downsides of traditional meat production. A study by Bryant and his colleagues in 2019 showed that people who learn about the negatives of conventional meat production were significantly more accepting of cultivated meat. So focusing communications on the negatives of conventional meat production can increase consumer acceptance. Then the third one, the third lever involves addressing the perceived unnaturalness of cultivated meat. The perceived unnaturalness of any novel food technology is often related to an emotional response known as disgust sensitivity. So when we perceive that something is just, against the order of nature, is unnatural, we tend to react, with disgust, which is a very primal response. A study that I conducted among Huber's consumers in 2024 showed that the mere experience of eating cultivated meat significantly boosted post-consumption acceptance levels, showing that experience and familiarity with cultivated meat can reduce initial resistance. And importantly, the majority of the diners that we surveyed at Huber's identified the tastiness of cultivated meat as a critical factor for influencing them to want to come back and to eat cultivated meat again. Oops, did the slide disappear?
Yeah,
Did
went to, yeah.
Okay, let me see if I can bring it back. Okay, sorry about that. Let me just fast forward. Okay, yeah. So the last lever has to do with social motivation and norms. This is an area that has not been paid sufficient attention to, at least with regard to cultivated meat. We know already very well that social motivation and norms have a huge influence on how people take to novel food technologies. In a study that I conducted in 2022, we found that Singaporeans were surprisingly more accepting of cultivated meat compared to American consumers. And we found that Singaporeans' higher acceptance of cultivated meat was heavily influenced by their greater social motivation. So in other words, when compared with American consumers, Singaporeans had stronger impression management motivations. So in other words, we are, as a people, much more mindful of how we are perceived by others when it comes to our food consumption. And while we didn't test this specifically, we speculate that a big part of the reason for the higher acceptance and the higher impression management of Singaporeans may be attributed to a cultural trait known as kiasuism, which is the trait of wanting to appear to be more ahead, more progressive, more forward-thinking than others. So we argue that future studies could maybe look at whether by signaling that they are accepting of cultivated meat, by telling people that they want to eat cultivated meat, they may be indirectly signaling to their audience that they are more progressive and forward-looking than their audience. I'm almost done. So in terms of conclusions, I think these are perhaps 5 of the things that government agencies, but also industry players can do to highlight the benefits of cultivated meat and to mitigate the risk perceptions of cultivated meat. One is to clearly communicate the safety of cultivated meat using the the authority and the trustworthiness of regulators like SFA to instill faith in consumers that cultivated meat has undergone rigorous production and regulatory processes. The second is to highlight that the consumption of cultivated meat translates into greater health benefits because it comes with lower disease risks. The third is to emphasize the drawbacks, both environmental and ethical, of conventional meat production and consumption. The fourth is to emphasize that cultivated meat actually tastes almost like conventional meat, and I can vouch for that. I've tried it twice. If I hadn't known that I was eating cultivated chicken, I don't think I would have suspected I was eating it. And as the diners in Hubris showed in our survey, they highlighted how tasty cultivated meat is. And studies in novel food acceptance have shown that taste and texture is one of the top 3 most important considerations when it comes to consumption. And then last but not least, perhaps in the very unique cultural context of Singapore, appeal to Singaporeans' kiasuism. And one way to do that is to emphasize product first. So for instance, if there is a chain of perhaps Hainanese chicken rice stalls that is serving cultivated meat, and it's the first chain to serve cultivated meat, then it should loudly proclaim that it is the first, because then it is giving Singaporeans the sort of alibi to proclaim to their friends on social media and in the interpersonal circles that they were among the very first to eat it. So that brings my presentation to an end. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Prof. Chong. Is there any questions for Prof. Chong from the floor? Okay, first up, we have one from the chat box. I'll just read it out. Has there been studies, or have the studies you listed earlier demonstrated that the entire process of cultivated meat production has significantly lower greenhouse gas emission than the environmental impacts of conventional farming, especially at the production level where we considered cultivated meat production to potentially displace conventional farming?
Yes, so I cannot think of the study right away, but it was a study based on some projective modeling. I will look it up, and I'm happy to share perhaps with the audience through Marshall, if that's okay with you. Would that be okay? I cannot remember the name of the paper, but it was based on some projective modeling of greenhouse gas emissions, comparing the production of cultivated meat vis-a-vis conventional meat production. Because I don't have access to the paper right now, and I don't also have access to the mailing list. Would it be okay if I shared the study with you for dissemination to the mailing list, Marshall?
Yeah, Ken has also said that he's okay with that.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, wow. Okay, we have Maggie.
Hi, Maggie. Sorry, my voice is cracking.
Okay. Hi, Professor Mark. Thank you for the presentation. I'd just like to ask, how does risk perception of cultivated food, meat, vary across demographics in Singapore, especially across age groups? Are young people more likely to accept cultivated meat compared to older age groups? And I realized that you didn't indicated the cost of cultivated meat as a potentially prohibitive factor to broader acceptance of cultivated meat in Singapore. So is that one of the major limitations?
I'm sorry, could you repeat your second question again? I didn't catch it.
The second question is that given that the cost of cultivated meat is generally higher than normal meat, do you think that this will pose a major limitation to encouraging acceptance of cultivated meat in Singapore?
Yes, so let me address the second question first. In a qualitative study that I conducted and which was published in the Journal of Environmental Psychology, we did find from our in-depth interview of 20 Singaporeans that the cost would be a major factor. But I have to emphasize that this is based on in-depth interviews of only 20 Singaporeans. The cost of cultivated meat in restaurants, in restaurants like Huber's, is I think it's okay for me to say this, is highly subsidized. So I remember paying about $25 for my chicken pasta at Huber's, but that is a highly subsidized price. And I understand that, based on the economics of cultivated meat production a year ago, I don't know about now, that every time that a company sells cultivated meat, they're actually losing money because of the economies of scale. They haven't, a year ago, they weren't able yet to crack the economies of scale of producing it. So, that's one of the reasons why it was only available in very limited quantities. If the meat that was served on dining tables was not highly subsidized, I think the cost would be prohibitive. A year ago, I don't know about now. The first question had to do with whether there are differences in responses across demographics. In the 2023 study that I conducted, we actually hypothesized, like you, I'm reading between the lines, and we hypothesized that younger Singaporeans would be more accepting of cultivated meat than older Singaporeans, and we found that the difference was not significant. It was not statistically significant.
Okay. Thanks for the insightful answer.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Prof. Chong, we have another question from Herman. He would like to actually ask you, what is your thoughts about what the government and industry should do in response to active misinformation campaigns? So, for example, it's like for insects, there was a coordinated and concerted effort by right-wing news source to paint insect protein as a ploy by rich people in the World Economic Forums to make poor people eat bugs while the rich eat beef. The misinformation campaign included fake or wildly misinterpreted signs. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
Okay. So misinformation isn't an area of it isn't one of my areas of expertise, and I actually I'm not aware that there was a concerted effort by right-wing groups to misinform the public regarding insect-based protein. But I think we are living in a highly fragmented world, right, which is not helped by social media and our media consumption habits. I think going back to what Michelle said earlier, clear communication from trusted sources like SFA, can go a long way towards addressing the confusion that's caused by the misinformation. I think, there is a tendency to want to combat misinformation with more facts, but facts have been shown to be not as effective when when the communication approach does not also factor in emotional appeals. So I think communicators need to bolster facts with more emotional communication, especially storytelling. And Michelle, if you have anything to add, please feel free to jump in.
Thank you. Yeah, this is obviously really interesting to me, and just let me take the opportunity to thank you for a very really fascinating presentation. I'd love to know more about some of those that Singaporean identity of progressiveness that makes people pick up new things. That's fascinating. Love it. And I'll just put something in the chat because insects when they regulated insect protein as safe in the EU, there were 3 or 4 misinformation campaigns going around Europe around it, so that would be replaced. We're no longer in the EU, but that meat would be replaced by insects without people's knowledge, or the insects were actually poisonous, or they were trying to make us. It was because we ran out of food because of the war between Russia and Ukraine. There were a whole load of conspiracy theories went round about that. So I just think if people are interested, I agree with you completely on what are the things you can do to counter it. And it sort of goes back to being the trusted authority and maintaining and working really hard to maintain and enhance your trustworthiness in a very competitive world for trust now. And if you like, I could put our most recent piece of work, which came out 3 days ago, on how you do that in the chat as well. But this is something we're all thinking about right now and struggling with. I know that colleagues at EFSA are thinking of doing some experimental work on how to counter myth and disinformation, possibly because of things like this.
I think we could also maybe learn from the experience that the US had with the anti-vax movement. I'm not super familiar with the literature, but I suspect we could probably glean some lessons from their experience.
And quite recently, we had one in the UK where I don't know if you have. You probably don't, because there's not as much agricultural production of milk, but we have an additive that goes into cow feed called Bovaer, which actually reduces the production of methane, which is obviously good for the environment. But then a story came out that Jeff Bezos was trying to put poison in the butter for reasons unknown to me or anyone else. It's got nothing to do with Jeff Bezos. It isn't poisonous, and it doesn't come through. It's entirely metabolized. But that suddenly became a headline. I mean, that was really big story in the UK for a good week or so, about 3 months ago. So it's as an ex-comms professional, the pace at which these things can take traction now in the social media age is just incredible. And I think we're all running hard to try and keep up with what you might do.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle.
All right. If there's no other questions, maybe can everyone join me to thank Michelle and Prof. Chong for the insightful presentation and their time here. We have actually come to the end of today's webinar. Thank you all for taking your time to join us. And we hope you really have gained some valuable insights from the 2 presentations that you have seen earlier. So we actually look forward to seeing you again at all the other future events